Bible Club. Eternal life.
It's time to believe in Luke 9.
Crucify my flesh, I'ma beat it to death. Gotta gasp it for breath. Till the day I rest. No more shackles, no more chains. I'm out of my cage. No longer bound, cause I'm no longer a slave. Crucify my flesh, I'ma beat it to death. Gotta gasp it for breath. Till the day I rest. No more shackles, no more chains. I'm out of my cage.
Good evening, everybody. This is your host, Huge Pop, from the Huge Pop Wrestling Podcast. And tonight, I'm behind the ropes, Wrestling Unplugged. We have a special guest. Our guest is a ring announcer for Rebel Spirit Pro Wrestling. She's involved with Coastal Championship Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Action. Other work our guest has done is Fightful Online and the Title Match Network. Our guest works alongside another podcast friend of mine, of Toned In Entertainment. Please give a warm welcome to Julie Cutler. How are you doing tonight, Miss Julie?
Thank you so much. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much again for having me. I know we've been chatting about this for a little while now. This has been in the works for a little while. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to be on the receiving end of the interview. Normally, I'm the one holding the microphone asking the questions. So this is very cool for me. Thank you.
Awesome. So is this your first time doing it?
I've done a couple in the past, but it's been a little while. A little while. So I'm always excited when I get the chance to tell a little bit of my own story.
Awesome. So we're just going to jump right into it.
Sure.
When we're talking about the wrestling business, we all started probably as fans, right? So
Yes.
Can you just give us up to speed of what it was like for Miss Cutler to be a wrestling fan?
Absolutely. So I probably started watching wrestling. If I had to guess, I think I was about 6 years old. And it was like sort of the Attitude Era going into the Invasion era when WWE purchased WCW and ECW, which was a time that I had so much fun as a kid watching. It's funny because I feel like now when the internet chats about the Invasion storyline and that whole era, I feel like it isn't really super well received, just because there were a lot of people that were key players in WCW and ECW that didn't get to be a part of that story. But as a kid, I thought that was so much fun because I felt like there was almost real tension between both sides. And so I grew up with two older brothers and also a very close family friend of mine who is kind of essentially like an older brother to me. I've known him my entire life. And so they started watching wrestling when I was about 6 years old. And me being like the pesky little sister, I just wanted to be involved in what my brothers were doing. And I wanted the older kids to play with me and I wanted to be included. So I remember as they got into it, one of my older brothers, he started getting like the action figures and the video games and all of these things. And I just naturally started getting into it alongside him. And I don't know that I remember specifically like my first match or anything like that I watched, but I do remember playing in my family room one day, and I think it was a Saturday. So it was either something that we had recorded on VHS tape way back in the day, or it might have been like Velocity or Jacked, one of those other like auxiliary shows that WWE used to do on the weekends. But I remember watching it with my brother, and I remember seeing the Dudley Boys on TV. And that was kind of just like how I got sucked in. I think also as a child, there's a lot of like the inner workings of the wrestling business and the technical side of wrestling that I didn't really understand at that point in time, but really just like the storytelling aspect of it was what pulls me in at a young age. So that's how it all began.
Oh, you talk about Dudley Boys and, you talk about Ric Flair and Sting, all these guys from back in that era, right? How do you feel about seeing those guys? Like the Dudley Boys just showed up on TNT, whatever they call it, Impact, I guess.
Yes.
Does that upset you? Does that bother you? Or do you think that's good for the business?
It depends on the context, I will say. I will say, like, seeing people show up in general makes me very excited because these are the people that I watched growing up, and to have that nostalgia moment, and also just to see that like they are still involved in their doing what they love and like finding different ways to reinvent themselves over the years. Like that makes me very happy for those people. I personally loved when Sting joined AEW and he had this last little run that he did where he was teamed up with Darby Allin. I absolutely love what they did with him there. And I think it was just perfect because I felt like he did enough from a wrestling standpoint where we got to see Sting in action and we got all of our nostalgia moments as fans, and he still looked really good. But at the same time, being paired with Darby in the way that he was, it also helped elevate Darby as a character. And I think that, you know, when they were doing like mixed tag matches and things like that, they were very strategic about how much they utilized Sting versus Darby. I think that they had a really good balance in terms of how to make each person look their best. So in a context like that, where it's very, very well done, I love to see it. And I think in general, just, you know, people are going to, especially now with the wrestling landscape, having so many different options between WWE, TNA, AEW, NWA is picking up a lot of steam. There's so many different options. And I think it's great for the fans, number one, but also great for the talent that if maybe they aren't happy in one place or they don't have an opportunity one place at the moment, they have options in terms of where they want to go and how they want to express themselves creatively. So generally speaking, if it's well done, I love to see it. And I like to see people in the business have the opportunity to thrive.
Awesome. Let's jump right into what you do in the wrestling business. You're an announcer, a ring announcer. So
Yes.
how did you get started in pro wrestling and the business and as a ring announcer? How'd that all come to play?
So it's kind of an interesting story. And we talked about this a little bit before we hopped on the interview, but I think a lot of the opportunities in my career thus far, it's funny because it's been sort of like a chain of events of one opportunity somehow leading into the next, somehow leading into the next. And I've been very fortunate in that regard where I actually started out, well, originally obviously as a fan, and then I sort of got pulled into like the podcasting side of it, really not even initially looking to be involved. There were a couple of guys that I had met through social media and also just through attending independent events in the Northeast. And they were doing a wrestling podcast that was sort of targeted towards like super fans, and it was called Nerds of Wrestling,
Okay.
which I believe they also have a pretty active Facebook group as well. And so they asked me if I wanted to be on it, and this was maybe like late 2021. And at that point in time, I was going through a lot of changes in my life, and I was kind of trying to like step outside of my comfort zone and try a lot of new things. And so when they asked me to do this podcast, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Like it seems fun. What do I have to lose? Why not? So we did it, and I had a great time. And I realized that I just really enjoyed talking about wrestling. And it's funny because years prior, my dad had told me kind of in passing multiple times, and I never really took it super seriously, but he always told me that like he thought I would be really good in like a broadcasting type of role. And I always thought that was a cool idea, but I never really knew logistically how to make that come to fruition. And so I did this one podcast and I had a great time. And so what I did was I was very lucky and fortunate that I had a couple of people that I knew, a couple of connections in the wrestling business that did wrestling podcasts on like a larger scale than where I had started. And so I just happened to reach out to those few people and I shared the link of what I did. And I said, hey, if you happen to have some spare time and you want to watch this and let me know what you think, I'd really appreciate it. And so I sent, just kind of networked and shared that link with a few people. And then they watched and they said, oh, okay, cool. We'll have to have you on our podcast sometime. And so that's kind of how it started. Like I started going on podcasts with like larger and larger followings. And that spring, the spring of 2022, I started working with Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful, and we started doing primarily AEW pay-per-view post shows together. And he had been a friend of mine for a couple of years before. And again, like I had just shared some of my work with him as I started doing more podcasts, especially just started kind of like sharing my work. And that was kind of what planted the seed of, oh, okay, I'll have to have you on my show at some point. And so we started doing mostly AEW pay-per-view post shows together. And again, I think it was kind of like a right place, right time sort of scenario, because a lot of the pay-per-views that we covered that year were ones that had a lot of buzz around them, particularly Double or Nothing that year, because there was a question of like whether or not MJF had bought a plane ticket. Was he going to be there? Was he going to leave? And then that fall, that was the brawl at All Out that we were getting coverage from kind of like as it was happening. And so we had a lot of viewership from a lot of people that were not only tuned in like for the pay-per-view content itself, but were also just tuning in to see if they could get some like behind the scenes information. Right. And so I noticed like when I started doing those, I'm still like in the very early stages of building my social media, but I started noticing that I was getting like more followers every time I was doing these podcasts. And then again, like lucky coincidence, I had, some friends that were involved in the wrestling business. And I had a friend who is a promoter for Pro Wrestling Action down in Florida. His name's Daniel Max Shaw. Very good friend of mine and a wonderful, wonderful man. And he had reached out to me saying that he needed an interviewer for one of his upcoming events. And so that was when I booked my flight and I came down. It was December of 2022. I came down and I did like my first live interviews at an independent show. And so I started doing more of that once I kind of got in like the live show atmosphere. Then I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, podcasting's cool, but just being here and being a part of this atmosphere is like something totally different that I realized I loved so much. And so I started pursuing that more. And then as I started pursuing opportunities there more, one of the companies that I had reached out to up here in the Northeast, I'm based in Massachusetts, one of the companies that I reached out to, they brought me in. Initially, I thought I was going to be doing interviews. That was kind of how I presented myself. And then it turns out that they needed a ring announcer. So I came to a few events and they kind of got to know me and let me go out and do like some crowd hype stuff just to get a feel of like who I was and what my skill level was and things like that. And so the ring announcing kind of just fell into my lap. And then I started doing that. That was July of 2023 was when I did my first show ring announcing. Okay. And it was another one of those things where I did it for the first time and I just fell in love with it. And we've been building from there with the interviewing piece and the ring announcing piece, and perhaps more to come in the future.
Awesome. So that was you mentioned Pro Wrestling Action in that.
So Pro Wrestling Action, that was where I started doing interviews. I'd gone there a couple of times and I'd done interviews. I've done ring announcing and interviewing for a number of different promotions. I'm currently the primary ring announcer for Rebel Spirit Pro Wrestling, which is based in Massachusetts. I also did ring announcing and interviewing for Coastal Championship Wrestling, which you had mentioned earlier on in the show. And then I've done interviews for Big Time Wrestling, which is based up here in the Northeast. The last show that they had was in Worcester, Massachusetts in September. And I'm also going to be debuting as the primary ring announcer for a promotion called Fight Factory Wrestling, which is based down in New Jersey. So I'm really excited about that opportunity as well.
White Factory, you said?
Fight Factory Wrestling, yes.
So I will tell you, you mentioned independent wrestling, and 2 years ago I had the opportunity to go to my first independent show, and I'm hooked, right? Because those guys go out there, they have fun, they put on a show, and they tear the house down. So the chair behind me, next to the WWE guy, is from the promotion Extreme Impact Wrestling XIW out of Panama City.
Okay.
With Jackson Slade, Damian Wayne, Adrian Whisper, Vordell Walker, some of those guys you probably heard about down in South Florida. But that you said it, because independent wrestling is where it's at, in my opinion, because dirt sheets are all over the place about WWE, AEW. You can't go on TikTok without knowing what's happening tomorrow's show, and that's kind of, for me as a fan, it stinks. So I see, as independent wrestling fans, it's so much fun. They're so passionate about it. So that's what I'd like to talk about, is the independents. That's what I base my podcast on, is to give the independents the platform to share their story. And and we get legends on here as well, and we get ring announcers like Julie Cutler as well. And so it's been a blessing so far. And so, has there been any challenges in doing your ring announcing, and what kind of challenges do you go through as far as getting prepared for this? And
that's a great question. I actually don't know that anybody's ever asked me that before, so I really appreciate this question. So when I first started ring announcing, I knew that I didn't want to use cue cards, and I know that there are some people that do, and I totally understand, because it's a lot of information to memorize. Like when I do a show, I memorize everyone's information on the show from top to bottom. They're built from weight, any monikers that they have, name, obviously. And that was one thing that I wanted to make a point to do right away. And it's one of those things that depending on who you are, and depending on like what your propensity to memorizing that type of information quickly is, it's one of those things that could be easier said than done. The very first show that I did, I reached out to most of the talent in advance. And that was one good thing, is obviously indie wrestling, and wrestling, the wrestling business in general, there's a lot of things that can change at the last minute. If someone's not able to make the show for some reason, or vice versa, sometimes there's talent that shows up that maybe wasn't advertised prior to the day of. But I at least have an idea of what the card looks like. So what I did the very first time I started was I reached out to everybody on the card in advance to collect as much information as possible so that I could start memorizing it. And then I was lucky. Usually, depending on which promotion I'm at, I can I'll either be sent backstage between the matches, or I'll at least be sitting ringside, where I might have an opportunity to look over my notes between matches. So that was one thing that was really important to me, was I never see people on TV using cue cards. I wanted to make sure that I memorized the information. And I also felt like in some ways it's just like a show of respect to the roster members, to show them that I care enough to reach out and get their information in advance, and that not only do I want to memorize it, but by memorizing it and sort of getting it in my brain, it gives me the opportunity to then sort of creatively have fun with it and try to make sure that as I'm announcing, I am, emphasizing the right parts of their name so that it sounds good, and that I can come up with little nuances to hopefully make everybody's entrance announcement sound special in some way, as opposed to just blindly reading it off of a card. So I really do try to connect with the talent if possible and learn all of their information. So I would say that's one of the challenges, along with I've noticed, like, watching my videos over time from where I started to where I am now, like getting the cadence down. I was listening to some of my old videos, and I feel like when I first started, I wasn't really talking fast, but like for how I would ring announce now versus how I would ring announce then, I feel like the cadence that I was using was quite a bit faster than what I would do now. So also taking time to just breathe. And I'm worried in my brain sometimes about, like, oh my God, like I need to get the announcement done so like I can move and get out of the way and like give their talent the spotlight and not take up space from them. But trying to find that balance of like, okay, like, yes, like you want to do your thing and give them their spot, but also just take a breath and like be mindful in making the announcement in such a way that doesn't feel like you're rushing, and you're really able to like lean into everything that you're saying and make it sound special. So I would say that those are some just little things. I think from an interviewing standpoint also, there's a lot of little nuances to being a good interviewer that people don't necessarily know or think of in advance. And I think that the more that I've had opportunities to talk with some people that have worked at a higher level, or people that have worked in production before, where I can learn those little nuances, that's really helped me a lot. Because I don't want to say anybody can be an interviewer, because that's not true. But a lot of people can pick up a microphone and ask questions and think that they're doing a good job. But there's a lot of nuances that you need to know for like TV purposes, like what is gonna work well on TV, how long to talk for, like where to stand, which, how to hold the microphone, little things like that a lot of people don't know. And I'm still very much learning myself. But just kind of like really polishing my work along the way. I guess I would say that that's really the other challenge, because some people, like I said, some people have more of a natural propensity to like picking up certain skills than others. Like for some people, the idea of being an interviewer or being a ring announcer and like having to do that much speaking in front of a crowd is terrifying. And then, for some people it's not that scary, but it's a matter of learning how to do all of these little things the right way. So I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that like I'm really honing in on now is not just doing it, but making sure that I'm doing it in such a way that could hopefully elevate myself in my career to new heights. Because there's a lot of little things, like depending on which independent promotions you work for, there's a lot of things on the indies that aren't necessarily designed to work well for TV. So it's a matter of making a point to work with people that are better than you, working with people that are better than myself, that are more experienced than myself, that can give me those tips and tricks that I just haven't learned yet, and learning how to incorporate those into my work.
Thank you. That's awesome. You probably know one of my friends, Cha-Cha Charlie, right?
I love Cha-Cha Charlie. Yes, we danced together at the last CCW show that I was at in Kissimmee. Good.
Because I'm gonna throw out, and I didn't talk to you about this, but I'm gonna throw out a challenge to you.
Okay.
Let's hear, if you are right, if you're comfortable with, let's hear Julie Cutler introduce Cha-Cha Charlie to the CCW crowd, or the Huge Pop Wrestling Podcast crowd.
Do I remember? I might remember his Cha-Cha. I apologize in advance if I'm off with your weight, but I think it's probably pretty close. Introducing first, from Miami Beach, Florida, weighing in at 225 pounds, He is the franchise and the current CCW Tennessee Heavyweight Champion, Charlie.
I bought a shirt. All right, I'm a Charlie fan too. I bought the shirt. I was at a Monster Truck Jam, and I got the shirt that day, and I went down to by the barrier, and I did a Charlie dance, and he liked it, so that's pretty fun.
Yeah, I'm double checking my notes right now because I'm like, did I remember all of his information correctly? South Beach, Miami, Florida, 225 was correct. He's the current CCW Tennessee Heavyweight Champion. That is correct.
Good job. Perfect. So I didn't want to throw you under the bus, but I wanted to hear
That's
you.
Okay. I've actually only announced for him one time, so I'm
okay. All right. There you go. Knocked it out of the park. So can you share with us any unforgettable moments in your announcing or even interviewing career, or even a podcast, something that was, oh my God.
Well, we had touched on this again a little bit before the interview while we were chatting. I think one of my most exciting moments was back in September of this year. I had mentioned I had done some backstage interviewing for Big Time Wrestling in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was such a cool opportunity. I feel like I just was having like the time of my life that day because they bring in a number of talents that have performed in WWE and at a higher level other places. And so just being in that locker room and being able to work with people of that caliber was so cool. And the really, really memorable experience about that day was the fact that they had Sting there in full attire doing a meet and greet before the show. And then he had also gone out to address the crowd at the very beginning of the show. And so I thought that I would be so silly if I did not take the opportunity to introduce myself to him and chat with him a little bit. So once he had finished up the segment that he was doing at the beginning of the show, I went up to him backstage and introduced myself, and we got chatting for a little bit. And he is such a sweet man. And we talked a lot about, just like his career and what he's been doing in AEW the past couple of years. And something that we said before we parted ways, we took a few photos together. And I said to him, I said, this isn't the last that you're going to see of me. Like, if you're going to see me again, whether it's on TV, for one of the major companies, or you're going to see me somewhere. This isn't the last of me. And he said, I'm sure I will. And that was really cool coming from him, and just being able to speak with him on a personal level and chit chat backstage. That was such a fun moment. And also just really heartwarming. Anytime you have the opportunity to meet your heroes, meet the people that you idolized on TV growing up, and to interact with them in real life and see that they're also just really kind people in real life on a personal level, that was such an unforgettable experience for me. And I'm really grateful actually as well to the people that brought me into the promotion that day, the promoter, the producer that is a good friend of mine, and also the promoter of Rebel Spirit Pro Wrestling, and then a couple of the guys that were doing the camera work. They were backstage and actually got some really cool photos and videos of my interactions with some of the bigger stars. So I was really thankful that they were there to capture that as well, because that was a really special memory of mine. And it's even more special to be able to like have the photos and everything to look back on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so much. That's cool. I met Sting at River City WrestleCon. That was probably one of the coolest things ever. But I will say this, at River City WrestleCon, I got to walk up and stand 2 feet from Jimmy Hart and talk to him just about life and about wrestling. And that experience alone not to take away from anything about Sting, because Sting is my favorite, but just to have those interactions, like that backstage interaction that you're talking about, means so much more than, I mean, Sting signed my belt back there.
Exactly.
So it's more important, that signature will always be on that belt. But the memory of talking to Jimmy Hart will be right here all the time, you know.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel too. Like I love, anything that I have from the years that I spent as a fan going to events and going to meet and greets. Like I have so many photos and autographs and all of those kinds of things, but nothing beats those personal conversations and interactions. And I've been lucky to have some really uplifting conversations with some people that I looked up to in the business before I was ever involved with the business.
Right.
So it's just a really cool full circle moment.
Absolutely. I met, I celebrated Tatanka's birthday with him.
Aww.
It was so cool, and it's cool. So, how do you deal with the pressure of performing in front of an audience? Is it crazy? I mean, I've seen CCW's audience.
Yes.
Them guys are crazy.
I had such a great time there, though. I had such a fun time. I will say, I have been involved in performing arts of some sort pretty much my entire life. So when I was young, my mom signed me up for dance classes when I was probably about 4 years old. And I did my first dance recital shortly thereafter. So like I grew up doing dance recitals. I played the violin growing up, starting when I was, I think, about 8 years old. And so I was used to dance performances, concerts. I was very used to being in front of a crowd in some capacity. And also, like, even when I was in school growing up, there's some people that absolutely hate giving presentations in school. Like they get so nervous. It's like the bane of their existence. They hate getting up and presenting things. And obviously school is a little bit different than like performing, in a wrestling ring, because the content isn't necessarily as fun or entertaining. But I remember like when I was in school, if I had to present projects or read a paper or things like that, it was a little nerve-wracking just getting up and being in front of a crowd, but like it never really bothered me very much. And like I said, there were some people where, I knew that they really did not feel comfortable. They really didn't want to do it. But when I did it, like, I think there's a normal amount of nervousness to feel anytime you're getting up and performing or presenting something, just because it means that you care, right? If you're wondering about how it's going to be received and you're worrying about doing a good job. But I always really enjoyed it. And it wasn't something that like really scared me. And especially with like things that I enjoyed, like my dance and things like that, I was, I guess, a little nervous, but I was always very excited to perform too. And then when I got to college, I started doing competitive Latin ballroom dancing as well. And that was something where not only was I performing, but I was also being judged by a panel of judges and being looked at under like more of a microscope in that way. And then fast forward to 2021, this was right around the time where I did that very first wrestling podcast. I also signed up and I competed in the Miss Massachusetts USA beauty pageant. And so I performed in that. I competed in that in the spring of 2022. And so again, that's the situation where I was also I was performing, but I was also being judged and, walking around on stage in an evening gown and a bikini and doing an interview in front of a panel of judges. So I do have a number of experiences that I think helped to prepare me a little bit to kind of be in the wrestling world in that way. Like I've always enjoyed performing in different ways. And I think wrestling, in some ways, it's kind of like a culmination of everything that I feel like I've been working towards over the course of these several years, because all of these other hobbies that I've done, like dance and music and whatever it may be, like I've always really loved and enjoyed them. And I've always, I've worked very hard, and I think I was pretty good at a lot of those things. Like I was a pretty good dancer and I was a pretty good musician, but wrestling is the thing that makes me feel like I am so in my element when I get out there in front of the crowd. I think this is the first thing that has really 100% made me feel like this is where I'm supposed to be.
Okay, yeah. So I got a question for you, and I have a hard time dealing with this. So
That's sure.
you go into a wrestling event. Like I said, I cover XIW, Extreme Impact Wrestling, out of Panama City. I have my setup there. I have my mics. I have my cameras. I'm supposed to be broadcasting this live on my channel, but I'm a fan as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my struggles, I'll be honest with you, is I'm a loud fan. I'm an obnoxious fan. And you have to reel it in. How do you I have not conquered that yet. How do you reel it in? Because you get so invested in these independent storylines that you forget about what you're supposed to be doing. That's broadcasting this to the channel. So how do you deal with that, wanting to go over the top as a fan?
Honestly, so during the shows that I work, I don't know that I really have a lot of time, to be honest, because I think really being immersed in a broadcasting role, you're always wearing a lot of different hats, especially for independent events, because maybe for like a WWE or an AEW, there's probably a lot more hands on deck from like a production standpoint, from a setup and teardown standpoint. Whereas in independent wrestling, it's kind of variable how many people you have doing certain tasks backstage. And so I'm kind of always busy for the most part, especially as the ring announcer, because you're going out at the beginning of the show and kind of doing crowd hype stuff and getting everybody excited. And then, you're going out between every single match to announce the match and announce the competitors. You're announcing the winner of the match at the end of the match. And then depending on where I'm working, whether I'm watching ringside or whether I go backstage between the matches, like I'm always looking over my notes for what's coming next, especially if we have like other segments. There might be times during the show where I'm going out to promote merch that we have for sale, or wrestlers that are promoting their merchandise or doing pictures and autographs, or other things during intermission or after the show, whatever it may be. So I think for me, I'm so busy that it's hard to not be immersed in what I'm doing. And then when I do have those moments where like maybe I'm sitting ringside and just watching the matches and enjoying the matches before I have to announce who the winner is, I guess that's kind of like the one time where maybe I do get my moment to watch just kind of as a fan, but I'm reacting I guess how I normally would to the matches, seeing the action that's happening. And like I might have people in the audience behind me actually, saying things, and I might say something back to them. And it's just kind of like adding to the experience, I think, for everybody. Because like my reactions to what's going on in the ring are like genuine reactions. And so, I think that's just being immersed in the experience, adding to it for, other people that might be in the audience looking at me and they're seeing my reactions. And then like, we're kind of having like a little back and forth interaction. So when I do get those moments to like watch and be a fan for, 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is, I might still have eyes on me that are looking at my reactions, but that's kind of feeding the fans that are there. So I guess I'm always busy, and whether we're doing like setup or tear down stuff after the show, I think it's good practice for everybody who's involved with the show to try and help with that process as much as possible. So there's always a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was at the last event. I was giving Chase Stevens a hard time because he turned his back on Damian Wayne, and I let him know how I felt about it. And I ended up having a water bottle thrown at me, so that was pretty
Oh no.
it was fun. But anyway, what is your most memorable experience, whether it's an interview or announcing? Who was that one? If you have any, oh my God, I get to announce this guy. Oh my God, I get to interview this guy.
Oh, I had a couple. There's a couple. When I did CCW back in October, that was the Kissimmee show. It was Conquer Kissimmee 28. So we at CCW have relative, I guess he's not really the new heavyweight champion anymore. He won the heavyweight championship, I believe it was Bash at the Brew back in October, if I remember correctly. There is an up and coming independent wrestler named Meadow who won the CCW World Heavyweight Championship from QT Marshall, who's with AEW. And I believe this was his first title defense back in Kissimmee later that month. And he was going to be defending against a mystery opponent who I actually didn't know who it was either until I got to the venue that day. But it was Rich Swann, who was previously in WWE and is now working with TNA. And his entrance, that man just has such an incredible energy. He knows how to work a room like no one else. And his entrance was, he came out to the song All Night Long. Okay. And it was like one of the most magical things that I'd ever gotten to be a part of. Nice. Just the way that he came out and he like went through the whole crowd and he was dancing with everyone and he was picking up kids and carrying them around and everybody in the room. It was pretty packed at that point in time as well, because this was the second to last match to the main event. And so it was pretty packed in that room as well. And he actually, this was like one of the first times I think I've seen this on the independents where he went through his entire entrance music. Like they didn't have to fade out the music at any point during his entrance. Like he literally used up the entire song, just dancing and interacting with the crowd and having fun. And so that was so cool. And then after the show, he had his guitar and was just kind of like noodling around on his guitar. So we were singing together and having our own little duet. So that was such a fun experience. I also loved announcing last October of 2023, I got to announce Juventud Guerrera, who again, such a sweet person. And I actually ran into him later, like this past year. I was doing interviews at the 2300 arena during WrestleMania week, and he was there, and he came up to me and gave me a big hug, and it was just so cool to like have, made that connection to then know him on a personal level, where we had that kind of rapport. So that was so cool too, to be able to announce for someone who was like doing big things in their career when I was like a baby. So I think those were two very memorable announcements for me thus far.
Well, thank you. Do you have any tips or advice for anybody that wants to be a ring announcer or a wrestling interviewer that you'd like to share that they should pay attention to?
A couple of things. And again, I definitely feel a little bit of a sense of imposter syndrome sometimes giving advice, because I feel like I'm still so early in my career and there's still so much that I'm working on and improving upon. But in the time that I have been doing this, I would say a couple of things. Number one, and we had kind of talked about this before, just the idea of starting somewhere and not being afraid to advocate for yourself and to network, because I think that there's so much value in being able to do that. And I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out and just like ask the question like, hey, is there an opportunity available? Or, can I show up to this event and help out with something? And like, maybe by doing that, they'll find some opportunity that's available. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. don't be afraid to put yourself out there and network and reach out to people. I think sometimes, like I said, people are hesitant to do that, but I think if you do it in a way that's classy and professional and you are making the effort to make those connections, there's going to be a lot of times where people tell you no. And I was experiencing this, I would say earlier this summer. I was going through kind of a phase where I was reaching out to a lot of new promotions and looking for new opportunities just to kind of expand my horizons. And there's going to be people that tell you no. There's going to be people that don't even respond if you send out emails or messages, but there's going to be some people that do. And so amongst the 10 emails that you send out, you might get 1 or 2 yeses. Pursue those yeses. And something that I think kind of goes along with this is don't be afraid to create your own yeses. And what I mean by that is now we have the very powerful tool of social media. And so if you can do things to promote yourself on social media and create your own content, and even during those times where like maybe you're feeling a little discouraged, maybe you feel like there's a lull, like you have a lot of shows at one point in time and then you kind of go through a lull, like maybe it's the holiday season, or like I feel like there's a certain time of the summer where I felt like things got a little less busy as well. What can you do during that time to continue to promote yourself? Like for me, we talked a little bit before about how I do podcasting with my friend Tony Miller from Toned In Entertainment. And so every so often, Tony and I will get together and we'll reach out to independent talents that we think are really interesting and on a really good career trajectory, and we'll bring those people on to do interviews, and boom, now we all have created our own content, and it's a win-win for everybody. That performer gets exposure and they have the opportunity to share what they're doing, and then we have content to share for our pages as well. So things like that. Can you do podcasts, or like every now and again I like to do photo shoots with different photographers to get new promo photos for my page and things like that. So just being really creative and enjoying the creative process as well of being on the indies. I think that sometimes people are so focused on the end goal of like needing to be signed by company X, Y, or Z, which is, I think, a goal for most people is if you're working on the indies, you want to potentially make it at a higher level, but also enjoying the creative freedom and the creative process that we're able to be in right now, and like really make the most of it so that you can express your individuality and show people what makes you special, what makes them want to sign you to a contract. So I would say those are a couple of big things. I feel like I had something else that was on my brain, but it might come back to me at some point once we keep talking. But I would say just like not being afraid to advocate for yourself, reach out to people, and just like inundating people with who you are, creating authentic content for your page that shows what makes you different from everybody else.
Well, everything that you just said, I mean, I didn't realize that question was for me, but you said some important stuff that made me look at what I want to do in the future, and it makes me feel like, oh, okay, there are opportunities out there, and I hope some of your social media, some of your wrestling promotions watch this, and who knows, that the sky's the limits, right? So just be confident, and that's what I hear you saying is just be confident, promote yourself, and just keep on doing it, because I think a lot of podcasters or whatever, they do it to get big right away. Mm-hmm. And instead of, like, for me, I do it because it's my self-care, and if it blows up, it blows up. And if it really doesn't, at the end of the day, I'm 54 years old and I have a career in foster care, and, this again keeps me sane. Hopefully, sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it does. So, yeah.
But I think what you mentioned is really important, is that this is something that you have a passion for. And I think that's something that matters a lot in this business is, at the end of the day, is this something that just goes for everybody across the board, whether you're a wrestler, podcasting, managing, whatever it is it something that you are genuinely passionate about? Is wrestling, being in the wrestling world, something that you are genuinely passionate about? Because I think that over time that passion shows, and a lot of the time passion can translate into creativity, understanding the business, understanding the inner workings of the business, and finding new ways to be creative and to stand out, sort of knowing and understanding those things.
And I think a good support system is important too. I mean, I know my wife, she tells me all the time to keep going. This is what I want to do. This is my self-care. My mom passed away a year ago in October. And the last thing she said to me is, she goes, don't stop doing that podcast, because she used to watch the podcast all the time. So I'm like, I'm not going to quit, because it's my blood. I love wrestling. I love talking about wrestling. I just love it. I love meeting new people. I love meeting you. It's just been a great time. So what's your opinion on how ring announcers have been evolved over time? I mean, Samantha Irving, what's her name that just left WWE? Some of the best I've seen on TV. So how has it evolved over the time from back when you were watching it as a kid to now?
That's a great question. I would say, well, when I think of like ring announcers that I really admire, I always come to like Lillian Garcia and Justin Roberts. I feel like those are the two that I probably study the most, just in terms of like their cadence and what they do. And I think that, I guess, to try and answer your question to the best of my ability, looking at ring announcers and even backstage interviewers in the business, and looking at different people across different companies, across different periods of time, there's certain people that really stand out to me as being awesome. Like, another person that I love to watch, like from an interviewing perspective, is Renee Paquette. There's a couple people that like I'll go to and study in terms of trying to figure out like how I want to present myself, and learning the right ways to do things for people that have been on TV. And I will say that there's certain people that stand out, and I think that it's almost a little bit hard to put my finger on in some ways, because I think that like the people that really stand out to me, maybe it comes back a little bit to what we just talked about with passion. These people that I emulate, I feel like they're people that they have a naturally charismatic and authentic personality that makes them likable and makes them an interesting personality. And of course, as a ring announcer or an interviewer, your job is more so to highlight the talent as opposed to trying to be the star yourself. And yet the people that I find to be really good have at least something innately about them, some sort of like innate it factor about them that still makes them likable and interesting. And you don't feel like it's just somebody standing there with a microphone. And to be honest, I don't know if it's something that I can fully define or explain. I think that the passion that we just talked about is something that ties into that. Is it somebody that is passionate about the business, or maybe has like someone like a Samantha Irvin who has a lot of performance experience in a lot of different areas as a singer and as a musician, being someone who is a multi-talented performer. I think that's something that clearly very much worked to her advantage as a ring announcer as well. So that's something that I would say. In terms of evolving over time, to me, I think it just depends on like the person more so than the time period that they were in, because I think that, even like I think back to Lillian Garcia, like when I was young, and there were times that they utilized Lillian or even some of the other broadcasters like Jonathan Coachman. They actually did utilize them as characters in certain storylines in some capacity, which is a little bit unusual for someone in a broadcasting role. Samantha Irvin, they did a little bit, like when it came to her announcing Ricochet, for example,
Right.
the feud that Ricochet had with Logan Paul. So I think sometimes different people have different opinions on that, walking a fine line with like someone sort of being a broadcaster versus like working them into the storylines. But I would just say like personality and passion and having that authentic it factor that makes you somewhat innately interesting. And I guess as a ring announcer as well, like, do you have the right cadence, and do you make everybody's ring announcement sound special and unique in some way where it makes the announcement memorable, as opposed to does everything kind of just sound the same?
Right. Absolutely. So my last question until I get into the weird questions.
That's okay.
So you've announced and interviewed with small crowds, and you've announced and interviewed in bigger crowds. Is there a difference in your preparation knowing the crowd size?
Honestly, I would say no. For me personally, because this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but sometimes I don't know what the crowd size is going to be.
Okay.
Sometimes you have an idea, I think, depending on the promotion or depending on, I mean, if I know anything about like ticket pre-sales or things like that, like you might, or the venue capacity, there's all these different things. Sometimes you might have an idea of what the venue capacity is going to be like. My philosophy, and again, this is going to sound a little cliche, but is just prepare to the best of my ability, 110% that I can prepare to. And sometimes, like I said earlier in the interview, it's not always going to be easy, depending on the amount of information that I have in advance about like who's on the card, who's booked for the show, what are the storylines, are there long-term storylines that have been happening between certain people that I should know about to ask them the right questions, or is this a promotion that maybe runs every some number of months and maybe there aren't as deeply woven stories behind all the matches. So I would say it's, for me, preparing 100% to the best of my ability, given the amount of information that I have going into the show. But regardless of crowd size, because sometimes too, like as an interviewer, sometimes we do pre-taped interviews backstage. Sometimes I might be doing like an in-ring spot where I'm interviewing somebody before or after their match in front of the crowd. Sometimes I don't always know in advance. So I just have to prepare to the best of my ability with what I do know, and then work on the fly once I get there. And that's a lot of indie wrestling and the wrestling business in general, is learning how to work on the fly. But I will say those are some of the situations where I have learned the most.
Awesome. So, if you could feed any wrestler a meal that you prepared,
Ooh.
who would it be? What would it be? And how do you think they would react?
Oh man, this is such an interesting question. So in terms of a meal, the first thing that my brain goes to, so something that I have shared on my social media previously, there is an Instagram page. It's called Superstars of David, and it is dedicated to Jewish wrestlers and personalities in the wrestling business, including myself. I'm very proud to be one of the Superstars of David. And I'm not necessarily like I don't want to say I'm not the best cook, but I just don't necessarily cook very often. But one of the things that I think I am pretty good at is, for the Jewish holiday Passover, there are certain dishes that I will make with my family for Passover. So I would say that I would make some of my classic Passover dishes, which usually I make. There's something called haroset that we make on Passover. It's like a mixture of like chopped up apples, honey, cinnamon, and like diced walnuts. And it's like a spread that goes on top of the matzah that we eat on Passover. So like I would make that. I would make my Passover brownies. Matzo ball soup is the one other thing that I've made on Passover. So like maybe some of those dishes. I'm trying to think of who I would share them with. Oh, this is tough. This is tough. I have to pick maybe like one of like another very famous Jewish wrestler. Maybe I'd make them for like MJF, except I think his reaction would be very poor.
Yeah, right.
I think he would be very critical. But because of my limited cooking abilities, I would have to lean into Passover food because that's probably what I do the best.
Okay.
Some of those like auxiliary dishes. I guess I'd make them for MJF because he's probably one of the Jewish wrestlers that I genuinely admire so much. But him being the personality that he is, being the heel that he is, I bet he would be very critical of them.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Bo Johnson, you always have to bring your A game, and like Julia said, being authentic is the best way to go. Yeah, absolutely. Bo Johnson and PW101. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Help grow the followers. Subscribe to Julia Cutler's channels and stuff like that. It's been a fun time. I got more to ask. So, okay. So I stole this one off. I stole this one. The Fiend, Bob Holly, Doink the Clown, and Danhausen are riding in a car together. Who packs the best snacks?
You said Bob Holly, Danhausen, and Doink the Clown?
And the Fiend, Bray Wyatt.
Oh, the Fiend.
Yeah.
Who packs the best snacks? This is a tough question. I'm trying to think, like, who do I genuinely think would have the best snacks? I feel like the Fiend snacks would be kind of spooky. I feel like Doink the Clown's snacks would be like gimmicked somehow. Bob Holly's snacks, and then the other option was Danhausen. Danhausen's snacks they'd probably be cursed. So I guess maybe Bob Holly by default.
Maybe.
I feel like his would be the safest.
I think you're right on the safest, but I think the most interesting would be either the Fiend or Danhausen, I think.
Yeah, I think most interesting. I don't have like a very adventurous appetite. So I don't know if I like interesting. I'm very simple when it comes to food. I like very simple things. So I'm gonna say for me, Bob Holly, he's the snack that I would feel the safest consuming.
Okay. What's the most embarrassing, if you've ever had any wardrobe malfunctions, what's the most embarrassing one?
Like during a show?
Yeah, during a show.
Mm-hmm.
Has that ever happened to you?
I don't know. Okay, this wasn't that bad, but this was actually at like one of those shows not that long ago for Rebel Spirit back in October. There was a match between one of our guys, Steve Gibkey, and then I'm trying to remember who his opponent was. I think it was Ryan Faust, if I remember correctly. These two big guys were getting ready to have a match, and Steve was going to cut a promo after the match. And so I wanted to make sure that I could get one of the microphones to him to cut the promo. But I think I got mixed up in the moment, and I thought that he was going to cut the promo before the match. So when I announced him, Ryan came out first, and then I announced Steve, and I was going to hang there and wait to pass off the microphone to him. so that he could cut his promo, in my brain, not realizing that it was after the match. And so I'm just like standing there. And actually, when he came out, he had like a vest that he was wearing, and I was still standing in the ring. So he just like tossed his vest on me like a coat rack. And it took me a minute to, like, I think under my breath, I was kind of like, oh, like, the microphone. And then he was like, after the match. And so I got myself out of there. But like, it was just this awkward moment of me, like, just hanging around when I didn't need to be hanging around. Which I guess isn't too bad. There's like a lot worse things that could have happened. And I think that we played it off well with him like throwing his jacket on me. So it ended up working out fine. A lot of the time in performances too, like there are things that happen in the moment that I know that are wrong or not according to plan. So it seems embarrassing to me. But looking at it from the perspective of the crowd that like doesn't know what isn't supposed to happen, it probably doesn't look as embarrassing as I thought. So that's just like one of the most recent ones that I could think of, was just hanging around, not realizing that they were waiting to start their match.
So I know you are in Independence. You're with CCW and Riot. The other ones you mentioned. There's some crazy crowds, so I got to ask this question. What's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard a fan yell while you're trying to announce somebody?
Actually, so there was something I thought was funny. This is actually at a show that I wasn't a part of. Like, I wasn't in the show, but I had recorded some promotional material for this particular promotion, just like advertising and social media. And one of my friends was wrestling, and someone in the audience shouted out, he goes, "That's my future ex-wife." I was just like, wow, we're jumping way ahead here. I think
Right. Funny. Right. So, I have kids questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I work with foster kids. I have 8 kids. They always say, "Mr. Scott, what you doing?" I said, "I'm interviewing wrestlers. Can we ask questions?" I said, "Sure." So real quick, favorite food?
Ooh, like I said, I'm really simple when it comes to food. I like very basic things. Like, I'm not like a really adventurous eater. I would say some of the things that I eat a lot. I'm a big pasta girl. I love a good spaghetti and meatballs, like a good angel hair spaghetti and meatballs. That's also always been a favorite of mine. I also love breakfast food, like pancakes, waffles, home fries, eggs. Like, I love diner food.
Okay. So if you had to have a pizza, does pineapple belong on that pizza?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No way.
No way. What's your favorite movie?
Oh, that's a great question. So actually, I have a couple of favorite movies. When I was in high school, actually my senior year of high school, I had a little bit of room in my schedule to take like a fun elective. And the elective that I chose was a film appreciation class where we watched a lot of the AFI top 50 films of all time. And one of the films that I fell in love with was based on a book, which was Gone with the Wind. And it's actually a really long movie. I think it's like over 4 hours long. But every time I watch it, I've watched it a handful of times. I feel like I pick up something different from it every single time. Another one of the movies we watched was Shawshank Redemption, which is an all-time favorite of mine. I have quite a few movies that I love, but those are probably the two of the most memorable. And actually, I have it's not really in the frame right now, but I have this Thomas Kincaid canvas of one of his paintings on my wall that's a scene from Gone with the Wind.
Nice. What's your favorite indie wrestler? Who's your favorite indie wrestler?
Oh my God. Oh, I'm going to guess. I know too many. I know too many. I don't know if I can.
I'm just asking the questions. I was just asked to ask this question.
I have so many friends that are indie wrestlers that I love so much. I mean, there's so many that I could name that are doing
timestamp this, okay?
Such cool things. Do I have to pick just one?
How about this? I'll make it easier.
Okay.
Top 3.
Oh,
No, it's not easier.
no, that's not easier. There's just so many that I love. I mean, I could give you like names of people that like I think are doing really awesome things right now, but there's just so many. For women, a couple of women that really stand out to me right now. Zeta Steele, who actually just got chosen as part of the WWE ID program. I know she did a tour in Japan earlier this year, and she's someone that stands out to me as just a really charismatic young woman who is getting a lot of really good exposure at a very young age, and somebody who I oftentimes think of as her counterpart, Brittany Brooks, who is the first ever Dreamwave Women's Champion. I know she's working really hard through an injury right now, and she's somebody who I have so much adoration for, because if you follow her on social media, she is always busy. She is always working hard and doing something. I've been following her through her recovery process in the gym, and she's always attending events, conventions, doing signings, and even during this time when she hasn't been able to wrestle. She's just like, if you want to talk about people that hustle and work so hard, she's like one of the best people that I can think of in terms of up and coming women.
Let's change this question then.
Okay.
Make it easier. Is there one male or two male wrestlers out there in the indies that you believe are those up and coming? Watch out for.
Yes. I think there's a lot. There's a lot that I could think of. If I could think of a couple off the top of my head, another person that just was selected as part of the WWE ID program is a friend of mine, Brad Baylor, who is based up here in the Northeast. And he is very young. He's only 20 years old. He is somebody who, when I met him originally, I feel like I had this sense right away, just based on his look and his training. He was trained by Paul Roma, who was formerly with WCW, and he's clearly very well trained. He's always wrestling all over the place for different promotions in the Northeast area. He's had the opportunity to train down in Florida with Natalia and TJ Wilson at their private training facility, the Dungeon. I know he's been invited there a couple of times. And so he's somebody like right away, I knew if he continued on the trajectory that he is on, that he will make it big places. Someone that he's feuding with right now at Rebel Spirit Pro is another young man named Miles Hawkins. And the two of them together, they've had a couple of matches so far, and they're actually having a best 2 out of 3 falls match this weekend. And the matches that they have had are just like phenomenal technical wrestling matches for being on the independents. So Miles Hawkins, he goes by the 99 overall. He is another one who, great physique, great talker. I would keep your eyes peeled for him as well. Again, there's so many other people that I could talk about, but we would be here for a really long time if I kept going. But there's just so many people that I love and admire their work in different ways. Like I said, we'd be here for like a couple hours.
Do you acknowledge the tribal chief?
Yes, I do.
It's a simple question. So, Miss Julie Cutler, I would like to have you close the show. Tell everybody what's going on this weekend with where you're going to be at, what promotions to look out for, where people can find you at. Give some hype to these promotions. Close the show, and then I'll say my last words. I'll play an exit song. Please don't go nowhere. I want to talk to you in the private chat.
Sure, absolutely.
So, Julia, it's your turn. It's your turn.
Okay, so this weekend I will be at Rebel Spirit Pro. That is in Marlborough, Massachusetts. It's at a brewery called Tacklebox Brewing Company, which is basically our home base. They are like family to us. We are going to be there on Saturday, November 23rd. The doors open at 6 p.m. and then the bell rings at 7:30. And this is basically our season finale for 2024. We are doing a 20-man Rebel Spirit Rumble, and this is going to determine the first ever Rebel Spirit Pro Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. So this is a huge show this weekend. Tickets are still on sale, but there is a limited quantity remaining. So if you're thinking about coming, if you're in Massachusetts, in the surrounding area, definitely go on our Facebook page or our Instagram at Rebel Spirit Pro and get your hands on those as soon as possible. Like I said, I have also previously been with Coastal Championship Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Action down in Florida, who I don't have a return date set yet, but I definitely hope to return probably sometime 2025. And I will also be making my debut for Fight Factory Wrestling in New Jersey, and that is February 2025. I don't believe they have formally announced the date yet of the first show, so I'll wait for them to put that information out there, but definitely be on the lookout for Fight Factory Wrestling in February of 2025. Scott, again, thank you so much for having me. For anyone that wants to follow me on my social media, I'm most active on Instagram. It is at the Crown Jewels. Crown is with an E at the end. It's the old English spelling. That's just how we roll here.
So Huge Pop Wrestling fans, I thank you for joining us in the last hour and 16 minutes. Julie Cutler, I appreciate all the information that you have given us and shared about your career and the uplifting, encouraging comments that you made as well. Fans, check her out at Rebel Spirit Pro, CCW, Pro Action Wrestling, Fight Factor Wrestling. Sounds like 4 solid promotions on the independent circuit. She names a few of these people. Check these guys out. Huge Pop Wrestling Podcast. Tomorrow night, we have Odd Man Johnson on the show. So come and check that out. Next Wednesday, you can sit with us in the afternoon and talk to Fatu. Not Fatu, Samu. My bad. Samu. So check us out. It's Huge Pop Wrestling Podcast. And as we always say, we're for life.
All my dogs, make some noise up in this house. Who is in the house? Who is in the house? It's the gangster of destruction, so you know what's going down. And when the drive-by's coming, then you better hit the grind. Cause when your body hits the canvas, then your head is knocked out. Who is in the house? Who is in the house? It's the gangster of destruction, so you know what's going down. And when the drive-by's coming, then you better hit the grind. Cause when your body hits the canvas, then your head is knocked out. Fight with Adrian Whisper is like a fight with the devil, because when he's dealing with you, you cannot get on this level. Fight with Adrian Whisper is like a fight with a king. It's like a fight with an army. They got the tanks and everything. He's leaving bruises and stitches, possibly leaving you crippled. Cause when he sets up the table and sends you straight through the middle. Take sadistic free, beat that ass with a light bulb. Leave a piece of glass embedded in the back of your skull. Who is in the house? Who is in the